This week, we welcome Henry Harrison, Chief Technology Officer at Garrison, to discuss how hardware security solutions from the intelligence community can help with the commercial industry. In the leadership and communications section, balancing the company's needs and employee satisfaction, technology that will actually make you more productive, 4 principles for security metrics, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Do you know what the biggest cyber risk is for your organization? It's the browser, and your users are in it all the time. Every time a link is clicked, untrusted web code enters your network and runs on your machine, exposing you to risk. What if users had full access to the web but never touched web code? You'd have all the benefit of the web and none of the risk. That's why Authenticate built Silo. It's a browser built in the cloud that runs all web content in a remote, isolated browser that never touches your network or device. With a simple click, your organization is fully protected from all web exploits. Find out more at securityweekly.com/authenticate. That's authentic number 8. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 150, recorded November 4th, 2019. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado. Joining me from G-Unit Studio in Rhode Island are my co-hosts, Paul Asadorian and Jason Albuquerque.
Hey, Matt, good to be here.
Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Good. Happy Monday.
Happy
Welcome
Monday.
back,
Not as good a Monday as we're used to having, but you know.
No.
I know, we won't talk about it.
No, we
can talk about it. The Ravens were a great team last night.
Yeah, they were.
I mean, you know.
We needed that. It's very humbling. Mm-hmm. It's good.
It is. I was when I saw the score, I'm like, really? So I didn't watch it, but definitely something miraculous happened on the Ravens side last night.
Yeah, their quarterback.
Yep. Pretty much.
The new Security Weekly website is officially live. Visit securityweekly.com to check out all of our new sorting and filtering functionality. Please let us know if you find any issues like the 2 404s that Joe just found, or have any feedback by sending an email to website@securityweekly.net. I will fix them right after the show, don't worry. By the time you see this, they will be fixed. Henry Harrison is a seasoned technology industry executive and serial entrepreneur who spent the last 10 years focused on cybersecurity, both as an independent consultant and as a technical director for cybersecurity at UK defense and security company BAE Systems. Henry's previous ventures include a desktop video conferencing startup and has been responsible for developing and selling advanced electronic solutions into governments, telecommunications companies, and financial services organizations, among others. Henry, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be with you.
So first of all, I love the accent, so we're just going to let you talk a lot.
Well, that should do it, right? That's all you need from me.
Exactly right. But actually, let's go through a little history, right? I mean,
sure.
This segment, we're going to talk about some of the lessons learned out of the intelligence community to be applied to the commercial side from a security perspective. But let's get a little background in where some of this knowledge comes from.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to go back almost exactly 10 years ago. And just at that time, I worked for a company with a lot of background in the national security space, and it got acquired by this big defense company, BAE Systems. And actually, what they asked us to do was go out and build them a cybersecurity business. And we had built some really cool stuff based around behavioral analytics, kind of building into a security operations center business and so on. And this is only 10 years ago. We used to go around and see business leaders and say, this is what we're doing. And the response we used to get was, hey, it's very cool the stuff you guys are doing, but this is really for 3-letter agencies only. I mean, why are you telling me this stuff? I'm a business person. I'm not a spy. And 10 years later, right, we have behavioral analytics in every network. Everybody's got a SOC. Everybody's got threat intelligence and so on. So this has form, right? These techniques that start out in the national security sector have a tendency to make their way ultimately into the mainstream commercial world. And it's kind of no surprise, really, because if you go like 20 years ago, then you had national security organizations who faced cyber threats from other national security organizations. But if you're a commercial organization 20 years ago, you faced threats from kids in their bedrooms. And that kind of threat landscape kind of converged over the last couple of decades. And now, the same attackers are attacking everybody. So it's no surprise, really, that some of the techniques that we see are starting to converge across those two markets.
And so in our national intelligence communities, right, they see these advanced threats way before most of the commercials. Financials maybe see some of this earlier than most of the other industries.
Well, I mean,
right?
I think these days that's right, but I mean, it wasn't the case even 10 years ago, right? Because like financials just weren't seeing this stuff. But nowadays, I probably spend about 50% of my time with governments and about 50% of my time with financial services. That tends to be the two sectors that I spend most of my time with. And the what we're hearing from some of the financial services customers is that the sophistication of some of the attacks that they're seeing is now, it's really approaching the same levels that are being seen in that kind of nation state arena. So that gap has already closed very, very dramatically. And not, I think, every definitely not the case that every financial service organization has really woken up to that. I was in a conversation the other day with two of the seniors at one of the world's largest banks, and one of them was kind of essentially saying, well, it's not really fair that we have to defend against this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, you're right. It's not really fair, but it's just the way, unfortunately, the world is now.
Yeah, it's really funny. I saw this meme. It was like hackers in the late 90s action movies, right? And it's this kid on a bus with the hat, like a cap and glasses and the anarchy sign on his T-shirt, right? And he's like chuckling. He's like, I'm in, right? Like that's how, those were the threats we used to have to defend against.
Exactly. Yeah. And now you've got this, but I mean, the world's just woken up to this whole thing the other thing that we used to get as a response 10 years ago when we were going around to see people, we'd go and see kind of business leaders and they would say, cybersecurity. Yeah, I think there's a guy called Bob in IT who deals with that. And now, it's like we spend quite a lot of time at the moment at the World Economic Forum. And their last kind of risk report had, I think, cybersecurity risk at something like number 3 or something. So business leaders all over the world now, they know that cybersecurity is something that affects them, and it's definitely no longer the preserve of Bob in IT, right?
It's funny. We've been talking about the progression, and I forget which interview. I think it might have been the folks from Qualys. We were talking about the progression of the security professional, right? And 10 plus years ago, and even still today, a lot of us in security are still the folks in the trenches because there's no one else, right? You're that guy, Bob, in IT. You're responsible for security. That means operationally, you're also doing security stuff and security research and threat modeling, right? Where I think it's going is that you're guiding the rest of IT when it comes to security. I really think that's the progression, that your technical outlets are more doing research, right? Reverse engineering malware and studying threats and testing stuff in the lab, and a lot less operational. That's the place where I think we have to be.
It is, right?
In order to achieve security.
And it's not just guiding IT; it's guiding the rest of the business.
Guiding the business,
right?
Guiding
the business, because you want your board of directors to make intelligent decisions with investments. Mm-hmm. You want your leadership to be making intelligent strategic decisions for the company, and you want your peers, if you have a seat at the table as a CISO, to be able to make those collaborative decisions with you to make sure that you're securing the entire business. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that would be interesting. I heard that I believe you've got a role that now involves CIO as well as CISO or something. But what we've seen over the last decade is a lot of the security focus was on overlay. It was stuff that you could do independently of the business, but and that's made a huge difference. But now a lot of what we see people needing to do is stuff that actually requires IT to do things differently.
Yes.
Right. So it's no longer something the CISO can just deliver on their own.
Exactly.
It needs to be IT actually delivers that. So I think we'll see more and more of that kind of convergence of the roles and the need to guide the operations of the rest of the business.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Do you see it going from a security operations center to just the operations center, and there's a security component to everything we do?
I think it has to be baked into the DNA of the business, right? Mm-hmm. So I honestly do, right? So for us, we're a technology services company. We have to be ingrained into the DNA of our implementation teams, our network operations center, right? Security operations center. HR, they're designing policies that if the InfoSec folks don't have influence on, it could be a policy that could have an adverse effect on the business. Same thing with finance, right? If we don't have a seat at the table with the CFO and we're not helping make decisions for the business and being an influencer there, we could have some bad practices or processes within our finance department.
Yeah, I mean, so the way that we tend to look at it is that you spent 10 years so 10 years ago, people were going, okay, well, this is, why are you telling me this stuff? This is not relevant to my business. Then you get, okay, the business got the idea. So now we have to put in place we really have to focus on the monitor and respond, the detect and respond parts of the NIST framework, right? So that's really been huge focus over the last decade. And now we've got to turn around and say, okay, well, is this really as good as it gets, or can we actually do stuff to protect ourselves better in the first place? And there are certainly folks out there who just go, yeah, this is as good as it gets. It's when, not if. There's nothing to be done about cybersecurity. All we can do is run operations, detect, and respond when we get breached. And I've always felt that's just a counsel of despair. You've got to say, well, actually, what can we do to make it harder for the bad guys? What can we do to make it more difficult to get into this environment? And that's certainly the space. If you look from a nation state perspective, citizens are not going to be very enamored of their national security organizations if they just turn around and say, well, you know what, there's nothing we can do. The bad guy, our enemies are always going to get into our systems. That's just the way it is.
Agreed.
And I don't think it's really tenable in the commercial space long term either.
Yeah.
So Henry, what are some of the things that you can apply from your background working with nation state agencies that can transcend into the enterprise? And I completely agree. I think we see a lot of enterprises, we kind of have that mindset of like, yeah, attackers are going to get in and we'll detect and respond. And I agree, we need to get on that protection front. But knowing all the hackers that we do, we know what a challenging task that
it's really hard, right? So if you go back again, decades ago, then how did the kind of national security world organize itself? Well, it basically said we basically do isolation. That's been their approach, and we don't really trust any technology to keep us safe. So we just have completely isolated networks, and we trust air, right? So we keep them separated, and they're separated by air. And frankly, there's not a lot of lesson to be learned in that for the commercial world because it's completely impractical. Yeah. You certainly don't want to be the guy who goes to the CEO and says, right, well, the answer to our cybersecurity is everybody's going to get multiple laptops, right?
Yeah.
That's the answer, and you'll be out the door pretty quick. Although that said, we have a banking customer actually which literally did that. That was the strategy they set off down. They were like, okay, our global payments group is such a big issue for us that we are going to cut off internet access, and we're going to start distributing a second laptop to everybody in that group so that they can access the internet. And I think they got up into double figures with that before it was clear this is not a sustainable strategy.
Right.
So that kind of approach isn't. But if you think about those worlds that were historically as isolated and air-gapped as that, that's not really a sustainable strategy for them any longer, right? Because they live in a networked world. They've got to operate in the internet. They need to take advantage of all the fish. So they've really been focusing on, well, how can we overcome the inefficiency and the business disabling that comes through isolating everything as strongly as we used to? And how can we do that without introducing all the security risks that the commercial world's got, right? Because that's obviously a non-starter as well. So quietly in the background, you've seen, and I think, in the UK, we've been particularly leading this field. You've seen some really strong innovation coming out of that national security sector about how to build those kinds of solutions that allow you to join very sensitive environments to very risky environments, right? So like, how do you, what my business does, for example, but there's other stuff as well, is like, how do you give people working on a very, very sensitive system the ability to browse to www.verydangeroussite.com in such a way that they can just click on a link, but you don't have to worry about the fact there might be malware at the other end of that link. And so that kind of stuff is really going on. And the question is, how do you build those kinds of systems that really can give you that level of trust that you would do that? And if you can build those kinds of systems, why would that not be the sort of thing you'd want to do in the commercial world as well? And the real insight that's unlocked a whole new field really there is the insight that you really can't practically deliver that just by writing software. You have to revisit things at the hardware level. And that might not seem like much of an insight, right? Because you can't go building brand new hardware systems for everything you want to do. But the final piece of the puzzle that made it all possible was to start using a different type of silicon, as a type of silicon called a field programmable gate array, an FPGA, which is kind of, for those who don't know it, and obviously it's kind of been a tool of electronic engineers for many years, but for those who don't know it, it's essentially programmable digital logic. So it's kind of like allows you to get a halfway house between hardware and software. So it can be programmable, so you can change what it does, but once you've set it to do something, then until you reprogram it, it only does that thing.
And it does that thing really fast, right?
Well, yeah. So historically, that's why people have liked using FPGAs, because you simplify things down and then they go really, really fast.
Right.
And I've done quite a lot of that in my past as well. We did some pretty good high-speed systems using FPGAs.
Right. Yeah.
But
a lot of wireless researchers were using them back in the day.
And it's a big business, right? So there's I think it's a $5 billion a year business in FPGAs. So a lot of telecoms kit has FPGAs in. There's a lot used in, as you say, in wireless spaces and so on. So it's hardly a new thing. It's a tried and tested thing. But there's a kind of computer science type insight here, which is that if you the real reason that software is so vulnerable is because a computer is a universal Turing machine. Right, it's like it can do anything you want it to. Just give it the right software, and it'll do anything you want it to. And if you're an attacker, that means that you find a clever way of doing something. It'll do exactly what you want it to as well. But if you use simpler computational models that you can implement using FPGA silicon, then you really just massively reduce the scope for an attacker, because the thing's been programmed to do this thing, and that's the scope of what they can achieve is limited by what the thing has been configured to do. It's not a universal computing device. It will do that thing. And that is really exciting because it allows us to start building security controls that we can really have some strong level of confidence in. And at that point, you can really start to say, well, actually, I'm going to build some systems that allow me to connect very risky things and very sensitive things together in such a way that I really trust the security controls that are being implemented in between. So I know there's some of the terminology that we're using there around FPGAs and Turing machines and so on is not day-to-day conversation in the security space. But I think that's what gets me excited, is that this is really a new frontier for how to do security.
And Henry, are these primarily these types of hardware security components? Are they primarily at the networking and endpoint layer? Is that traditionally where these types of techniques can be applied?
Well, I guess there's all sorts of ways you might do it architecturally. There's a lot of stuff's been done at the network layer historically. There's no reason things can't be done at the endpoint layer as well, but I think endpoint change is a harder gig from a security perspective. We started off down this room. We said, shall we try and build a really great laptop that allows you to click on links? Or shall we try and build some network equipment that allows you to click on links? And the reality is that to go to a big enterprise and persuade them to go and change all their laptops is not a very good business model. But to go and say, well, you can install this equipment in the network and then you can do it, or you can use this as a cloud service, that's more of a practical proposition for organizations. So I think that's typically where it's being done today. But I think I do actually think that in the long term, the opportunity to take some of these ideas and build them into the endpoints is also going to be a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, we've always thought about aspects of our security programs kind of external to the network or the endpoint, right? We've always kind of wrapped solutions around, right? We deployed firewalls to protect the internal network from the internet, and that didn't get us very far. So, rethinking the problem a little bit is interesting. The question is, with cloud and some of the other technology trends that are going on, how much control do you have of some of that network traffic? Is it something you have to control at your side and the cloud providers have to do it? Are there ways to do that?
Yeah, I think the danger here, right, is that you end up seeing this as being a mapping purely onto a traditional perimeter model. And for a lot of government type customers, that is still very much where they are. They still have physical infrastructure defining this stuff. But there's no reason in the long term why this can't be consistent with a zero trust kind of beyond corp cloud model as well. Because the real question is not necessarily about networks in the sense of that might be practically where you deploy some of the kit. But really, what we're starting to talk about is the sort of segmentation which people are talking about in any way in the context of zero trust, for example, or beyond corp. And it's really about taking that segmentation and really thinking about trust in the context of those segmentations, and not just segmenting for the sake of segmentation, but thinking about, okay, well, what's the different trust environment I've got in this segment or in this segment, and incorporating the endpoint into that. Because I think there's a lot of security architecture that people are looking at the moment involving segmentation, but you've still got the fact that the endpoint has to be able to do whatever the user needs to be able to do, and that user is not going to have multiple laptops, right? And that or multiple phones, or they're going to have they want a human interface device that gives them access to all the stuff they need, and they need some really risky stuff like www.goodnessknowswhat.com, and they also need some really sensitive stuff like, hello, here's my customer database, or hello, here's, in the case of my banking customer, here's my global payments interface to the Swift payment system. And it's really about how you kind of extend that segmentation through, so that so that it runs all the way through the architecture, including through to the endpoint, where the endpoint can say, okay, well, if I'm going to access this risky stuff, I do it this way through this piece of equipment that's somewhere in the cloud, and if I'm accessing this sensitive piece of it, then I do it in a different way, so that ultimately I'm not presenting my endpoint as a potential pivot point between the risky and the sensitive. So that's kind of at the core of the architectural approach, I think.
But it still sounds like there's software involved, right? And anytime we've taken the same piece of hardware, I think that's why we had two separate pieces of hardware, right? Because we had that peace of mind that they were separate. Right. When they're one, it's still software that's applying those gates.
Well, not necessarily. I think that's so. If we try and get right under the covers here, I think there are two questions, right? There is a question, if you're going to go down a cloud architecture, of encryption, right? Because if we're doing a cloud-based architecture, we've got to talk to remote systems. We assume that we're plugged into the internet, that the things are over the internet. Clearly, we've got to have crypto between our endpoints and those cloud-based systems. And today, that's reliant on software, right? There's no doubt about it. And definitely, there are, if you go to the full-on government world, there are folks out there who say, absolutely, I do not trust software for crypto. I've got to have hardware-based crypto. And that will probably come in the commercial world, but it's probably not the biggest issue right now, right? Because the attack surface is relatively small. But the question is, once you get into the cloud, what are you getting to, and how does that give you access to information? So, for example, what we do is we have a piece of hardware that we produce that can sit in the cloud, or it can sit in a data center, and essentially it is a gateway to risky content. And the way that it does that is that it does some security, which in this case is essentially it turns the risky content into pixels, which is not unique to us. There are some other folks that do it as well. But the key point is that the control over that is implemented in hardware, so that at the hardware level that the only thing it's delivering to you is pixels. Now, you could think about the encryption link between your endpoint and that device. And at that point, you could, some of our government customers will say, I'm not going to trust software crypto as a way of getting between my endpoint and that device. I'm going to have to rely on hardware crypto, and they can go buy that, not from me, but they can buy it from other folks. Overwhelmingly, the commercial world today takes the view that, and frankly, I agree that software crypto is by no means the weakest link in the chain,
right,
that we're operating.
It's typically the user, and if you're making that user inherently more secure.
Well, it's the user's endpoint, right? I mean, because so the user, you can never stop people hacking people's brains, right? I mean, that's if you can come up with a solution to that, then you can not only can you solve cybersecurity, you can rule the world as well. But what you can try and do is stop people hacking the user's endpoint, because that's what happens, right? Is that the user does stupid stuff and it ends up with their endpoint being compromised, and then the endpoint has access to all the good stuff, and now it's bad scene, right? So try and focus on like what can you do to make sure that even if the user does a really bad thing, they still can't actually compromise their endpoint, and then now you're getting somewhere.
Yeah, you mean when the user does?
Yeah, when. That's a much better word to use. Exactly, that's right. You can, I mean, and everybody runs training programs, and I'm not really saying they shouldn't run training programs to teach people to click links, but I think it was really interesting that when we founded Garrison about 5 years ago, we came out of this big organization, and there were two of us, and then we got another couple of people, and we needed to hire some folks. So we got this lady who had worked with us at BAE Systems, who worked in human resources, to come and help us kind of set up a recruitment process. And she had been through mandatory anti-phishing training, right? I mean, I have no idea how many times she'd been through a mandatory anti-phishing training. And we were like taking her through an early prototype of our system. We said, if you just click on this URL, and she said, what is a URL? And I mean, I just thought it was a good indication of how effective phishing training probably is for most people.
Yeah, we've had some of those conversations recently about how there is, while some technical level gets instilled upon the users, there's often a lot that's missing. And when you talk about awareness and training, there's limitations to each of them. Right. And with solutions like yours and others we've looked at, anything you can do to lessen how much awareness and or training you give your users and still have them be air quotes secure, those are the solutions we need today.
It's not only good for security, it's good for business as well, right?
Absolutely.
Because if you go and hire people, you don't hire them to be cybersecurity analysts. Well, I mean, obviously, if you hire cybersecurity analysts, you hire them to be cybersecurity analysts. But if you hire somebody to do a job in human resources, you're not hiring them for their expertise in cybersecurity. You're hiring them for their expertise in human resources. And every minute that they spend doing training on cybersecurity is time that they're spending doing the thing that they're least efficient at, rather than the thing they're most efficient at. So really, the business objective surely has to be to optimize people to do the thing they're good at, rather than to, have them spend all their time trying to do the thing they're really not good at.
I completely agree.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is how far can you take a hardware security approach to help that use case, right? I mean, at some point, there's still a human in the mix that if you do the wrong thing.
You're right? I mean, so the XKCD cartoon, right? You probably had every interviewee probably talked about this one. It's the one with the two panels, and on the left-hand side it says the geek stream, and it says, "Oh, his laptop's encrypted. We got to build $1 million supercomputer to crack the password." And on the right-hand side, the guy's saying, the reality. It says, "Yeah, just hit him over the head with this $5 wrench until he tells us the password." And I kind of pin that up everywhere. So at the end of the day, it's people, right? So if they hit you over the head with a $5 wrench, you're going to give them the information. But the point is that you don't, if you hit someone over the head with a $5 wrench, there's a risk you're going to get picked up by the cops. But right now, just hacking into their system exposes you to effectively zero risk, and it's just terrifically easy. So that's the way people go. So you can't solve everything. You can never take people out of the equation, but you can certainly make things a lot harder.
Yeah, and if you can shrink down the attack surface, that helps, because users probably, in general, open up a big attack surface. So anything you can do to minimize that helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, for us, we started this business, we just figured the biggest attack surface is the web. I mean, people open a web browser and they think, I click on a website, it's become, but the number of things that happen behind the scenes when that actually takes place, right? It's like people that you've never met, that you know nothing about, send you vast amounts of all sorts of different types of content, and you have like a supercomputer sitting in front of you that churns through it all, that ends up displaying some image on the screen to you. It's an astonishingly complex thing with an incredibly large attack surface. And we just take that kind of thing for granted, but it's just fundamentally super dangerous.
Yeah, definitely.
So Henry, just a quick question. I mean, as a CISO and a leader within my organization, I look at the concept of reducing the range of functions of the hardware, right, as a protective measure. But then I also look at it from the adverse side that says, now I'm not going to realize the economies of scale that I could get out of this computer system, right? So what does that do? Have you done any research on what that does as far as investments and cost and things of that nature?
Yeah, but I think that's the key. I think the key is not to try and do that, right? Because if you clearly we still need regular computers. This is what we do. I mean, if we're going to take advantage of artificial intelligence, we're going to take advantage of automation and so on, we need the incredible revolution that the central processing unit essentially has brought us over the last few decades. So we really mustn't get rid of that. The question is, how can we build a security architecture around that that says, well, we're absolutely willing to take the risk because of the benefits that brings us, but we need to segment that, right? So that we say, okay, well, we've got this Ukrainian accounting system, and that's fine. We recognize the risk, but if it blows up, it better not take down the rest of our business. And so how can we build controls around the segmentation that mean that we can contain things and that we have confidence about what goes in and what goes out, and we can actually so it's a much more specific thing. And I think there's definitely a danger with this because it's so new and so different that people hear what I'm saying and they go, oh my God, he's suggesting that we're going to throw away people's laptops and replace them with some chunk of tin that only plays Pong. And
that would help security. Not so much usability, but
great from a security perspective. I think we can all agree that's the future, right? Because that's.
But I mean, at the end of the day, as we learn more about this, that's going to be the initial perspective from a leader who has a budget, right? So I have a budget. Yeah. I have to invest in security. I have to make sure I'm strategically investing in security. So the first thing I'm going to think about is, how does that affect my budget? So is it going to cost more money for my organization?
We're having a good conversation here, and you should be aware this is not how I run my sales meetings, right? We don't tend to talk about like, what problem can I solve for you, and typically the problem is like, how can I allow my users to click on dangerous links that are in phishing emails, for example, without worrying that they're going to bring down my network. So that's the practical day-to-day of what I happen to do and so on. I think, but it's fun in these kind of environments to project forward kind of 10, 20 years. Well, what's information technology going to look like then? Because, frankly, what we've got today is really not fit for purpose in the threat landscape that we're living in. So it's going to have to change pretty aggressively over the course of the next decade or two. Yeah. So, it's kind of, interesting to imagine where we're going. And that's kind of the direction of travel that I see it heading down.
we're going to carry around a phone that has an HSM module in it that connects to all the different cloud services that have HSM modules in it, and it might be a brick, but we'll be a little more secure.
Yeah, I mean that's why these things take a long time, right? And that's why I'm not sure the endpoint is the right place to start. But who would have thought we were carrying around in our pocket what we're carrying around today? And I don't know. I mean, personally, I'm not convinced how many more cameras we need on the back of a phone as we miniaturize things even further. Maybe it's time to start thinking about what security we put into this. And I suspect that the phone in 10 years' time is going to look somewhat different from a security perspective from what we're carrying around today.
Yeah, if you don't have 3 cameras or 4 cameras, right?
You're just not the cool kid.
You're just not the cool kid.
Yeah,
because the Pixel 4 only has 2, rear-facing cameras, but everyone's like, well, it's not as clearly superior to the new iPhone because
it only has 3 cameras. Yeah.
Good
yeah,
Lord.
it kind of feels like. I would hesitate to use the phrase diminishing returns, but just maybe.
Maybe. Henry, thank you so much for the conversation, and thank you for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Well, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
And we'll take a quick break, and then we'll cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.